Welcome to this week's last episode of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show this evening, is there a way out of the energy crisis, or are we doomed? Our panel for this evening weighs in on all the relevant issues.
This is the first doctoral thesis written in isiXhosa at Rhodes University.
On the eve of National Heritage Day, we look at the contribution of Indigenous intellectuals to the country's rich heritage. The Watchdog starts now. A post-cabinet briefing scheduled for this morning to detail high-level government discussions and decisions was postponed at the last minute. Now, coming as the cancellation did on the back of President Cyril Ramaphosa cutting short his overseas trip to return to the country to attend to the electricity crisis, it has ignited a lot of speculation about the reasons or whether, in fact, government even has a plan. So is there a way out of the crisis we're currently in, or are we simply doomed? My guests are Dick Fosland, a senior energy economist with the AIDC. Jose Moleshe is an energy expert. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for your time.
Good evening, Vuyo. Good evening to the listeners.
Yeah, good evening, Vuyo and everybody.
Great to have both of you. I want to start with you, Jose, if I may. I was a laughing stock of my friends and other people who knew you the last time you were on the program when I butchered your name. I'm not doing that this evening. Just overall, just your thoughts, having observed the events of this week. We were told that Cabinet went into emergency or crisis or whatever you called it mode, looking at how they can get us out of the quagmire we are in currently. Is there room? Is there something that they can do to really stop what we're experiencing?
We are the room, but very limited room with respect to what they can do. So they are looking at buying power from the region and buying power from existing independent power producers, 1,000 megawatts. But if you look at the size of the unplanned outages that Eskom is facing, there are between 15,000 and 17,000 megawatts at a time. So 1,000 megawatts obviously will not assist. It will maybe relatively reduce the challenge, but it's not a complete solution. They also are, because of the outages in the coal-fired power plants, you find that Eskom is using a lot of diesel. Over 5 months, they've used it has cost them 17.7 billion for that, which is way over the budget they had estimated. That means that because of the unavailability of the coal fleet, they have to rely on diesel. Now, that is not a solution that can be feasible. Not in the short term, not in the long term. It's just too costly.
For you, Dick?
You mean what should be done, or is there a way out of this?
Is there a way out of this? Do they even have room to maneuver as things stand?
There's always room for maneuvers. There's always room for change, and there's always a way out. But I mean, of this, there are divided opinions about it. So I think that one big issue which is on the table is the issue of private or public electricity provision to South Africa. I mean, that is the big issue. So on the one hand, we have the union movement, and we have the NGOs like AIDC, where I'm sitting. And by the way, I'm not an energy economist, even if we all try to be energy experts now, but I am indeed an economist. So I have something to say about Eskom's economic or financial crisis. But I mean, it is as for, and I think that is also the difference with the leadership of the ESCOM board. I see a lot of comments about incompetence and so on. I don't really go for that it's about incompetence. I think you can have competent people and nice people on different posts and so on, but it's about the vision for electricity provision and for ESCOM in the future. And I mean, we are adamant that ESCOM has to be fixed, because otherwise you will roll back the whole plan of electrifying, of providing electricity to all South Africa, a project that started since 1994. And I don't think, even if you can get help from independent power producers, firstly, we can see that it's not going fast enough. Second, I mean, if you have a private company and you are responsible to shareholders and so on, you want to sell electricity at the margin, at the prevailing profit rate, if you like. Otherwise, you don't want to provide electricity. You should do something else. But the public electricity provider can't argue like that, and that's also why I think that the policy of ESCOM to have full cost recovery, it's a utopia. You can't have this in a country like South Africa if you want to uplift the whole population. But I mean, it's also an issue of this issue of private and public is also an issue about immediate measures. So I think that immediately, I think electricity rationing should be on the cards in order to sort of overcome the coming 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks. And I can see that ESCOM, I saw on pictures, have put up billboards where they plead to those who are doing marketing on digital large billboards and so on. I think you shouldn't only ask people to close such billboards and close lights in offices overnight. You should decide that is what they must do in this situation. And even if you sort of might not save so many megawatts on doing this, I think the psychological effect of this would also multiply in society, and all unnecessary electricity consumption has to stop in this situation. That is just the first thing to do. And then ESCOM must take on the project to build out renewable energy itself. Otherwise, we will have a situation where electricity is provided mostly to Santon or people who can pay for the so-called full cost recovery, but you will not have electricity provided to Soweto. And I mean, I want to point out here also, and people have told me, and one can read about it in the news, as for Soweto, they don't have a stage 5 or stage 6 load shedding. They have stage 7 or 8. I mean, they can be out, there are areas there that can be out of electricity for weeks, either because people are not paying or cannot pay, or just because of the ESCOM sort of having schemes or rolling power cut schemes which hits such areas harder.
Oh, well, interesting what you say
there.
there.
Of electricity is one issue. You have to intervene from the state.
Well, interesting what you just said, Dick, because I was listening to one politician this morning who was, of course, dealing with his own court issues, the suspended Secretary General of the ANC, who was making, similar allegations that the townships are actually experiencing a worse form of load shedding than the rest of us. Of course, he speculated about the reasons, alleging that it's all part of making the ANC look bad and so on. But do we know for certain that this is, in fact, what is happening?
Well, I haven't been in Soweto myself. I have only read the newspaper articles about it, but I certainly believe it also. And one reason is, of course, that Soweto is one of the main debtors to ESCOM. I think that the accumulated debt that ESCOM is claiming now of the Soweto area is soon increasing to 20 billion rand or something like that. And as a response, maybe they are retaliating. But I mean, you have to ask the board and the CEO of ESCOM about it. But I mean, I don't think it's only the suspended general secretary who have this opinion. I think it's a widespread opinion in Johannesburg that this is the case, that poorer areas are hit harder. And of course, that is unacceptable. As for me, I'm right now sitting, you can see it's dark around me. And we have kind of power cuts now about 6 hours per day or something like that. Well, maybe it's 8 hours, but it's between 6 and 8 hours. But it can be 10 or 12 hours in other areas. That's what I have kind of read about in the news from my isolated place.
Okay. I mean, notwithstanding the opposition of like your unions and organizations like DIGS, but do private providers actually have the capacity to chip in and ease the situation?
They have the capacity, but it's relatively limited. So ESCOM used to have that, what used to be called short-term power procurement program, where they would procure power from your Sasols and SAPI and other providers that generate power for their own needs. And from that, there would be surplus that they would then sell back to ESCOM. And ESCOM stopped that program in 2017. And because of the cost recovery from NESA, there were complications in terms of whether how much ESCOM would be able to claw back from the regulator. So that is still an option. However, and also the renewable energy independent power producer programs may have, in some cases, oversizing of their facilities where they could either they could add capacity because it's modular, or they have oversized, say they can sell back. But as I mentioned earlier on, that solution is relatively small compared to what we are experiencing with outages from ESCOM of 15,000 megawatts. 15,000 megawatts, if you think about it, Kenya has almost 3,000 megawatts as a country, and 5 times that is out on unplanned maintenance. Then you have planned maintenance, which is about almost 5,000 megawatts. So it's a sizable problem that you can't just get that from anywhere. You need to fix the plants so that they perform at the expected rate. I mean, we have energy availability factor of 59%. That means that only about 59% of the fleet is able to give you power that you can. Surely there is something that can be done. Some people argue that the plants are relatively old. That may be true for some, but there are plants like Kusile and Metupi, which are less than 10 years in terms of age. Machuba is about 20 years or something. Others are 30 years. So not all the coal fleet in ESCOM is that old. And old fleet elsewhere in the world has been brought back on stream and modernized to make sure that it performs. So a real look at those things to make sure that the base load capacity that we can get from coal is reliably available. And then we use diesel only for the peaking periods or emergency power. That should be how the utility is run, not the other way around, where you rely on diesel.
In other words, are you saying then that your ESCOM is actually not doing what is established practice elsewhere in the world of bringing back these old power stations to assist in the crisis? Is that what you say?
So utilities in the world generally rely on what we call baseload capacity, which is a capacity that runs 24/7. Your coal-fired fleet, your nuclear fleet, that is the fleet that's supposed to be the reliable capacity. And then for peaking period, for peaking power, you can use pump storage, that is hydro, and you can use diesel. But it's not standard practice to use diesel as almost replacing your baseload capacity, because that is expensive. That should be reserved for emergency or certain periods in the during the mornings when we all wake up in the morning and the demand is very high, cannot be met by the existing coal-fired power plants, then you use diesel. And then in the evening, again, 6 to 8 or 9 in the evening, when there's a peak, you then use diesel again. But you generally use the stable supply, which comes from baseload capacity.
Well, in news just in, a statement, a cabinet statement has been issued. It was issued a few minutes ago. It hardly says anything. I'm going to read the 3 points on energy. It says, Cabinet was briefed by Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan on the capacity of Eskom to mitigate the intermittent load shedding, and also received a progress report from the Technical Committee of the National Energy Crisis Committee. Further announcements will be made following the conclusion of the intensive deliberations of these reports. Cabinet expressed regret at the disruption and inconvenience caused by load shedding to businesses and households, particularly happening at a time when government is engaged with the interventions announced by the President in July 2022. End of the portion on energy. It hardly says anything. But Dick, I mean, there are now these 3 procurement programs that have been announced as a means to address the load shedding crisis. The 3 procurement programs, we are told, are going to focus on generators capable of supplying more than 1 megawatt of power to the grid. Eventually, this threshold will be lowered to enable smaller producers to participate. Are you convinced that this will start to make these procurement programs will in fact make a difference anytime soon?
No, I am not. I mean, there's already been a delay in the agreement with independent power producers, and observers are speaking about something coming on the grid 18 months or 24 months from now. So something has to be done in the meantime. And I mean, the issue is also, does Eskom have the finances to do the necessary repairs of old coal power stations? Do they have staff enough, etc.? And I mean, I've seen many calculations.
I thought every cent available was being thrown at them at this point.
No, obviously, it's a lot of cents of Eskom is going down to debt service, as you know. So you have a debt service of 35 billion rand per year in the last financial statement. And the absurd thing, which is something that we have pointed out to unions and to the public since 4 or 5 years, the absurd situation is that 20% of Eskom's debt is to the state pension fund, which is harvesting an interest income of 8-9 billion rand per year from their loans to Eskom, which they are only issuing at market rates. And these are something of these anomalies in the whole setup of the finances of Eskom that has to be changed. There's no need for the state pension fund for these incomes because they are running with a surplus every year of over 50 billion rand per year. So I think the debt crisis of Eskom, I think that is something that is used. I wouldn't speak about the conspiracy, but there's a very strange silence about the issue of the public sector, so to speak, being indebted to itself. And that is the case when it comes to the relation between both the Treasury and the State Pension Fund, which holds about 12-13% of the state debt, and also charging market rate on that debt, and to ESCOM. So there's a lot to be done when it comes to the finances of ESCOM without taking money from the public service delivery budget, so to speak, taking it from public hospitals, from not filling vacancies in the public sector, and the situation in basic schools and so on. I mean, we have a terrible austerity, and I mean, that is why I'm skeptical about economists who tries to single out what the load shedding separately is costing the economy. We have, and I read Duma Kobule in Mail and Guardian just now. He speaks about a kind of a diabolic or a death cocktail of both austerity, very strict and sort of destructive monetary policy with the interest rate hike now, plus load shedding. And of course, that together is costing the economy a lot during you can't, when it comes to austerity, for example, if you have austerity in the police and in the security of society, well, then it's more difficult, of course, to deal with cable theft, which is one reason for ESCOM's problem. Another problem is the delivery of sub-quality coal to ESCOM's power stations, even to Medupe and Kusile, where we can read about sort of mafia organizing capturing of trucks coming with coal, which should be delivered to the coal power station. But on the way to the coal power station, half of the high quality coal is replaced with I don't know what, and instead half of it is going for export and sort of making people rich. And all this, of course, needs policing. You need even to have guards on every truck who is coming from the coal mines going to ESCOM power stations. Otherwise, that will be other unplanned breakdowns because the power stations are not built to cope with low quality coal or with sand or whatever they are putting in the coal. So there's a combination of factors here: austerity, the rate interest hikes, and the load shedding together, I would say.
Coming back to what ESCOM told us, Jose, I mean, these three procurement programs that they spoke about, which entail your standard offer program, your bilateral import program, and emergency generator program. And I want to focus a little bit on the emergency generator program because of what you were saying earlier about the use of diesel. It looks like, I mean, this is going to continue because the emergency generator program is going to mean that ESCOM is going to procure, from what they said, more expensive power when the grid is significantly constrained, as is the case right now. And the program will also allow independent generators to provide energy on a daily basis to compete with ESCOM generators. So what may not be the norm or what may be problematic about the state we are in is, in fact, what seems like is what is going to continue.
Yeah, it's definitely going to continue. We may have a reprieve when ESCOM brings back some of the plants from time to time, but it's going to continue for as long as we don't have reliability in those plants and we don't have any new additional capacity. So from those emergency procurement, because we are procuring now and we are procuring at a stage where we really need the power, it's definitely not going to come cheap. I suppose what ESCOM is looking for by having power coming from other users is just some reprieve to be able to logistically secure the procurement of diesel, because they procure diesel from time to time, and there's logistics related to that. There's also logistics related to pump storage, which they have to pump up the hill at during a time of off-peak, and then they have to release of during peak periods. So that those logistics also will threaten the system if they are not done in a prudent manner, and there's no power to support that. So anything that they add, even if it's small, it gives them some reprieve with respect to these logistics. But it's not a full-time, a long-term solution. It's not even a medium-term solution. It's just gives them a breathing space.
And your thoughts also on the bilateral power import program, which entails, of course, importing from neighboring countries. From what Eskom said, several countries have expressed an interest in selling their additional capacity.
Yes, the Eskom in the previous program that I mentioned used to get power from Mozambique from a gas to power project. So we do have a Southern African power pool where Eskom would be able to procure power within those entities. But as we heard from Botswana, for instance, they mentioned that they can only give them power when it's not peaking periods where there is available capacity, and Eskom would take that because they need, as I say, a reprieve to be able to replenish the diesel, to be able to replenish the hydro power schemes. So there is available capacity in Zambia. We're told there is available capacity in Botswana, and so that regional power they can be able to get. But they've estimated a total of 1,000 megawatts. So that is insufficient but helpful.
As we, go towards concluding this conversation, I want to take you back to what the president said a couple of months ago, Dick. He announced a whole range of measures. He said, and I quote, "will hasten the end of load shedding. They will put our country on a clear path towards reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy supply." And I'm taking you back to what the president said a couple of months ago on the back, of course, of this statement that I just read out, where they say that they have concluded what they call, quote unquote, intensive deliberations on the reports they received from the Technical Crisis Committee. Are you still hopeful, in spite of the fact that we've been told over and over again that there are intensive deliberations, and these deliberations are going to take us out of the situation we are in now?
I'm not doubting that there are intensive deliberations, but what is the content of this? What is the political direction? What is strategic direction? When it comes to affordable electricity, of course we cannot believe in that. If Eskom is demanding a price increase next year of 38%, which is the bid that they have put to NERSA, that is by far not affordable. And the demand, I think it's a 15-20-year-old demand from civil society organization that you should have 350 kilowatt hour free electricity on each household, and then you should start to pay after that. We are far away from that. So they are not with the policy of full cost recovery, which is Eskom policy now, which they try to run Eskom as a corporation, although it is a public utility. Thank God, still, it is a public utility. You can't run Eskom like a private company. Certainly not in a situation or in an economy and in a society like South Africa, when over half of the population is living on or below the poverty line. It's impossible. So this political direction they have of which also threatens, of course, to send Eskom into a so-called death spiral, when all the customers who are able to pay high prices and not rebated prices, which has been the case, for example, with the 40% of electricity consumption, which is consumed by the high electricity consumers. They should pay these high prices. but the households in general should be subsidized. And you have to make strict intervention in this situation now to save some gigawatts, 1 or 2 gigawatt, which will lower the load shedding scheme from maybe level 6, 5 to level 4 or level 3 until the end of the year. And that is to ration electricity and all the unnecessary use of electricity when it comes to sort of swimming pools or billboards for advertisement and so on, or offices and anything. It has to be outlawed by bylaws in the municipalities and in the provinces. I think that is kind of one immediate thing. And then ESCOM has to start now to build out wind and solar power. And I could see today in a thought leader even by a person like Tim Cohen of Daily Maverick, who I usually always disagree with. He is demanding of ESCOM now to start to build out their own power stations, because all the private sector sort of deliberations and negotiations, it's just taking too long time. And when it comes to climate crisis, I think that the private sector will only save us if it is to the right price.
Let's leave this conversation there. Special thanks to both of you for coming through for us this evening. Up next, Heritage Day is what we are talking about. We look tonight at the contribution of Indigenous intellectuals to the country's heritage. That's what's coming up in a moment. Don't go away. Heritage Day is about celebrating our vast cultural diversity and history. One of the least celebrated areas of our heritage, says a group of scholars based at Rhodes University, is the immense contribution of Indigenous intellectuals. Recently, they got together and produced a documentary titled Intellectual Giants of the Eastern Cape. Here's an excerpt from that documentary.
Let's just face it. In South Africa today, in the world, globally, the black woman intellectuals tend to be erased. Sometimes you don't even know them. You only hear them when you travel to other countries. We have committed ourselves to dealing with the erasure of black women scholars, the thinkers. Because the minute we do that and trying to unearth the histories of the contributions of black women, we might have different understandings of how we link gender into power.
Well, my guest for this conversation, Dr. Alet Squan, the director of the film from which that clip you just saw came. We also have Dr. Hleza Kunju, who is the presenter of the documentary. You may have seen him there. We also have Taryn Isaacs, who is a media history expert. Good evening to all of you. Thank you very much for your time this evening. If I may start with you, Dr. Squan, why is this matter important?
I think particularly we see it important not only for ourselves, but also for our students, to see that we do have intellectual history that goes way back to the 19th century, that's really rooted here in the Eastern Cape. When I test drive this film with my students, and it was fantastic just seeing them, being incredibly inspired and saying, we never knew this. We thought we were the first generation moving to be educated at university. We thought we were the first generation moving into the middle class. We didn't know, and I think, this is something that's also echoed in Hlez's family story.
Dr. Kunju, I mean, as someone who had to present this documentary, did you make any new, shall I call them, discoveries about things that perhaps you didn't know or weren't aware of before you got involved in this project?
Great, thank you so much, Buvuyo, and good evening to the listeners, to the viewers. Definitely, there was quite a few things that we sort of discovered. As also, even personally for myself, I discovered that some of my ancestors went to these mission schools. I didn't know at all about that information until I did the film, and also just to the realization that these intellectual giants that we're talking about, they were so involved, they were so concerned about creating knowledge that is about the African people, that is based in Africa, and most of the time that is done in African languages. So that was just a realization for me that something I was aware about, but as the more we worked on the documentary, the more I saw that wow, the issue of decolonization was not a debate; it was a lifestyle that they lived. Judging by the material that they've produced.
Taryn, I mean, this is not an exercise and just, pursuing this for purely academic reasons, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't. I think all of us have a passion and commitment to preserving intellectual heritages of those who came before us. And I think it's very important that we start unearthing those histories, because our country has its own history of erasure and silencing. And it's become very important for us to look into the histories that have been banned, that have been quieted, and that have been forgotten. And I think this film creates a really good segue into offering this excavation project, this excavation of heritage, excavation of history, and starting to look at who were these public intellectuals? What is it that they had to say about their own experiences? How did they imagine the future that we are currently living in today? And what can we learn from them to share with our students, with our country, with each other? And so the project really meant a lot to all of us. And yeah.
Erasure is quite a strong word, Dr. Squan, and suggests deliberateness, that someone went out of their way to actually do this. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. So, something that was actually quite shocking in terms of making the film, was that history of the early 19th century. This was even before apartheid, where suddenly, there was this strong tradition of intellectuals going into schools, and suddenly the British Empire, once gold and diamonds were discovered, they decided, no, we no longer need African thinkers, we need workers. And they just cancelled the whole project, and all of those people, lots of them just, went into poverty, lost their jobs, there weren't any more schools for their children. So it is a real tragedy. And our history could have been so different if we, had allowed that tradition of deep African intellectualism to continue. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Kunja, in the visuals we are showing, you go on this tour of places like your Lovedales and your hill towns. Who are these intellectuals that we are talking about, and what was the role of these institutions that you visited?
Thank you very much, Buvuyo. We're talking about, as you can see, about Diosoka, or S.E.K. Mkhayi, or Noni Jabavu, or DDT Jabavu, and many others, or there's many of them. And the Lovedale and the mission schools, they played a big role well, that is where they went to school. That is where they gained their education. And Lovedale, it was actually the hub. That's what it says in the film. It was the hub, not just for the Eastern Cape, but for entire Africa, for Black people to go and get educated from there. So that's the role that was played by these intellectuals and the institutions that I visit in the film.
And Taryn, I don't know if you agree with Dr. Squan about how the erasure, came about. Was it because our colonial masters felt a need, felt that they needed more workers because that's what was needed at the time, or was it a deliberateness coming out of a position informed by realizing all of a sudden that producing intellectuals goes against what colonialism was actually about?
Well, I think there's multiple reasons. And obviously, depending on who was in power at the time, that reason changed. Whether it was trying to control how people thought. I mean, a lot of these public intellectuals were liberatory thinkers. They saw a future deeply embedded in African languages, deeply embedded in African culture, but not a stagnant one which changed with the times. There was the need to have the right to vote. And today we're sitting in 2022 laughing about the fact that that the right to vote is even a question. But one of the big debates was around intellectuals fighting for the right to vote, the right to sit in parliament, the right to lead. And this became obviously a point of aggression, because how do you find yourself as a point of leadership when you need to be in subserviency? But nonetheless, these intellectuals, they did forge forward, and they created intellectual products that live on today in newspapers. And those early newspapers have become a source of knowledge for us to be able to find these contributions. They're still there. And what they show us about what these intellectuals were committed to, I think there's a lot that we can learn even today. So the erasure happened for multiple reasons. But I think as we move closer to, during apartheid, a lot of intellectuals were murdered, exiled, banned, their books were burned, intellectual contributions were demolished, all as we know it. I mean, we've seen books being burnt during that period. So a lot of this heritage was really purposefully destroyed. And I think in this day and age, as intellectuals today, it is really part of our mandate and our mission to start unearthing these products as part of our project and to share them with our next generation.
Dr. Squan, how do we now purposefully, to borrow from Taryn, restore the culture of, intellectualism?
Vuyo, I think, one of the things that really emerged for us from doing this film is to remember and to honor the past and to honor, those incredible achievements of those intellectuals so that people will know about them. And one of the ways of doing this is something that we were quite shocked to discover was the condition of the place that printed so many of the works of these African intellectuals, early African intellectuals, Lovedale Press, which is really in a terrible state at the moment. It receives no funding from government. It is being held together by a small contingent of the remaining staff who used to serve the presses and be involved in the printing processes, etc. When we were there, all the presses were put on top of each other because there was no money for rent, for electricity. It was in the dark. The landlord allowed them to still have the presses there, but they were storing more and more potatoes. And it's such a tragedy that this incredible institution that's really is the pride of Eastern Cape intellectualism is in such a state, and that nobody seems to be doing anything. And next year is their 200 years anniversary, and we don't even know if they're going to be able to exist anymore. So, I would say we need to remember, we need to honor, but we also need to do something to, save those institutions that celebrate this heritage.
Dr. Kunju, I mean, what then? You know, I'm just thinking out loud here from what Dr. Squan just highlighted. What if, you know, institutions like your university, like Rhodes, you know, take on, you know, the task of, for example, taking the Lovedale Press under its wing, or Forte for that matter, whoever is best placed. But it highlights to me the role that institutions should then be playing, isn't it?
Yes, I think I definitely agree with you there. We need places like Lovedale. We cannot sit and watch them in the state that they are in right now. So yes, institutions do need to play a role there. Well, unfortunately, institutions are already dealing with a number of things, but I think something like Lovedale, it's very important for institutions to really look into saving that, and not just keep it, but have the information that's there digitized and so on, so that it's current and people can have access to it like the same way people have access to other things in terms of, you know, technology and so on. Well, when we went to Lovedale, from there we went to another institution which promised us that they're doing something about Lovedale. So maybe in the next few months or so we will go back and find out how far they are, and then maybe take it from there. But definitely something needs to be done.
And Taryn, to someone who says, should we be talking about intellectual? Sounds all nice and romantic and politically correct and all of that. Should we not be talking about producing people who are going to, you know, solve our energy crisis? People who are going to be talking, you know, ICT, which is where the world is going. What do you say to people like those?
I think that intellectuals occupy multiple spaces and disciplines. So perhaps the people who will solve our energy crisis will also be intellectuals. Intellectuals have a very important place in society. And even if I just look at this film in particular, the embracing of African languages, the storytelling in isiXhosa, the preserving of poetry, of history really, I think for future generations, it's important to be able to see, first of all, themselves represented, their languages represented, and to say that you deserve a space. Take up your space as your own intellectual, as a thinker, to solve our country's problems. I think we need intellectuals to lead the charge.
Well, let me thank all of you for coming through and being part of this important conversation tonight. Dr. Alet Squan, who is the director of the film from which we played you a couple of clips. Dr. Hleze Kunju, who was the presenter of that documentary entitled Intellectual Giants of the Eastern Cape, and Taryn Isaacs, who is a media expert, was also involved in the project. And that's our show for tonight and for this week. Hope you do enjoy your Heritage Day tomorrow. Have a great weekend.